درود بر شما. همونطوری که در برنامه صبح قول داده بودم تا چند دقیقه دیگه یکی از مهمترین دیبیت هایی که در آمریکا باید در این زمان پیش میاد و این خیلی مهمه قبل از اینکه رأی‌ها مهم رو در آیوا و جای دیگه بگیرن. ولی میخواستم یه توضیح بهتون بدم که همونطور که گفته بودم مهمانی داریم که همه شما باشون آشنا هستید. آقای شمرانی خیلی خوش اومدید.
درود بر شما جناب عطابایی. سپاسگزاری میکنم از دعوتتون.
البته این کار ما غلط بود، ببخشید.
اشتباهه؟
آره.
چرا؟
ما اومدیم هم دیگه رو دیدیم مردم چطوری. خب نه ما همه عادت داریم جلوی میگیم سلام حال شما چطوره.
اگه این کار نکنیم بعدا میگن آقا اینا مشکل داشتن.
آره نه ما مشکل نداریم. عرض کنم که حتما میدونید که در این وسط یکی دو نفر غیبت خواهند کرد امروز و فکر میکنم که خیلی مسئله بغرنج شده به دلیل اینکه حملات اصلا این مودم هست وقتی که تقریبا 2 نفر یا 3 نفر میان بالا که یکیشون باید رئیس جمهور بشه دیگه. تو این دنیایی که سر $10 سر هم میبرن این چیز عادیه.
باید
وقتی بیان اینجا
اونقدر سر همدیگه رو ببرن اون بالا.
نه اینقدر به همدیگه میچسبن که خودشون میخوان رئیس جمهور بشن دیگه. این به اون نقشش میگه اون نقشش میگه. البته این محاسنی هم داره. محاسنش اینه که مردم پته اینا میفته رو آب و میبینن کدوم اینا میتونه بهتر باشه. البته باید یه چیزی هم ببینیم طبق اون که در تاریخ اتفاق افتاده. آقای کلینتون که داستانشو میدونید.
بله. از
زمانی که ایشون سیگار برکشه دیگه ما کسی سیگار برک نمیکشه. آقای کلینتون با وجودی که اتفاق افتاد ولی هم کارش ادامه داد و توی دموکرات‌ها یکی از پرزیدنت‌ها و رئیس جمهورهای خوب آمریکا بود دیگه.
بله خیلی محبوب بود.
آره ولی وقتی تو هنوز نمیخوای رئیس جمهور بشی و کاری هم نکردی، حالا اگه خرابکاری میکرد کلینتون خب هم وقت به قول ما فرانسوی‌ها چپاقشو میکشیدن.
بله.
ولی چون کارش درست بود آمریکا از لحاظ اقتصادی زیاد گرفتاری نداشت و همه چیز در دنیا راحت
بخشیدنش خیلی هم خوشحال شدن. البته گفتن چقدر
آخه دلیل داره. خانومی که داشت خانومش خواننده یا مدل یا فلان نبود. خانه بود که تو سیاست خودش بود.
بله.
اون خیلی سیاستمدار عاقل‌تر بود. اون پیش خودش فکر کرد که با کار کردن اینطور هم هر دوتامون از تاریخ سیاسی میریم بیرون. ولی اگه من ازش حمایت کنم اولا من بزرگ میشم چون این تا آخر عمرش خجالت میکشه من.
بله.
ثانیاً من راهایم درست هم فکر کرد. دیدید که من فکر میکنم که الانم که میدونید یه بحثی هست که در انتخابات اینا یه تقلب بوده.
همیشه این برنامه هست. امروز هم داستانش در اتفاقا رادیوهایی که پخش میشد من رادیوهای متفاوت گوش میکردم بحث خیلی بالاست در رابطه با اینکه کاری بکنن که همه با آیدیای درست بتونن بیان و ثبت نام بکنن یا بتونن رأی بدن. چون میگن خیلی ها هستن که میتونن هنوز در ایالت‌های متفاوت تقلب بکنن روی رأی دادن. کسایی که حتی گرین کارت نداشتن اومدن و رأی دادن در ایالت‌های متفاوت. امروز داشتن این رو در رابطه باش صحبت میکردن که در و بقیه مسائلی که در تگزاس داره
نه خیلی عقیده دارن که اصلا باید اگرم دموکرات‌ها می‌بردن که من فکر می‌کنم باید می‌بردن در دوره قبلی باید خانم کلینتون رئیس جمهور میشد. ولی حتما
بله. حتی زد و خوردهایی که اینو با هم انجام دادن با خود آقای اوباما رو ما دیدیم. خانم کلینتون و اوباما چه مقداری در اون بالا سرشاخ شده بودن. این در واقع عادیه برای رسیدن به اون.
خب ببینید من یه طور دیگه هم فکر میکنم. من فکر میکنم که آمریکا هنوز دامنش نسبت به جهان لکه دارتره. یکی از لکه هاش این نژاد بود که سیاه‌پوستا رو همیشه اذیت میکردن. این با اومدن اوباما حل شد دیگه. یک از سیاه‌پوست نمیتونه اعتراض کنه با من پارتی بذاره. رئیس جمهور هم شد. یکی دیگه از اینا هست که ما از اروپا عقب‌تریم. رئیس جمهورم چرا زن نیست؟
بله خب
اینا باید انتخاب میکردن گفتن خب آقا سیاها.
البته من فکر نمی کنم اگر خانم کلینتون هم حتی انتخاب میشد فرقی توی داستان به این شکلی که داشت میرفت میشد. چون دموکرات‌ها همیشه همین رول رو بازی کردن.
آره ولی این یه خورده کمتر من بهت میگم فرقش چی بود. فرقش یکی این بود که الان رفتاری که اوباما و نظریاتی که اوباما داره یعنی ظاهراً به این نظر اینطوری میشه برداشت کرد که اوباما برای اولین بار که آمریکا همیشه چه رئیس جمهورش دموکرات باشه چه این باشه اکثراً هوادار اسرائیل بود و از همپیمانان نزدیک اسرائیل هست. ولی اوباما این کار رو نکرده که الان
در صورتی که جامعه کلیمی پشت اوباما برای انتخاب شدنش ایستاد، بیشترین پول رو جامعه کلیمی خرج کرد و امروز نگاه میکنیم میبینیم درصد اعتبار اوباما حتی پایین تر از جیمی کارتر هست. جیمی کارتر 51% در دیبیتی که انجام داده بود با آخرین بار با ریگن رأی داشت، ولی امروز میبینیم که روی گوگل اگه سرچ بکنید میبینید اعتبار اوباما تا 40% پایین اومده.
رفتاری که اوباما داره یه مقدار، نه اینکه هیچ وقت نبوده، ولی یه مقدار غیر عادیه در بین رئیس جمهورها و اوباما. خیلی برای اینکه تجربه زیادی هم در این کار نداره احساس قدرت میکنه.
بله.
و به همین دلیل هم مرتب به این به حساب تهدید میکنه که هر چیز دیگه غیر از این بگید من ویتو میکنم، ولی اینطور نمیتونه باشه.
به دلیل اینکه ایشون اصلا سابقه سیاسی خیلی قوی نداشت. شما نگاه بکنید ببینید کسانی که با ایشون مشاوره میکنن در بخش فارن پالیسیش چه کسایی هستن، به خصوص خاورمیانه. در همین بخش ایرانی شما نگاه بکنیم چه کسانی به ایشون خط دادن برای زمانی که ما اون مشکلات رو در ایران داشتیم. ایران تنها کشوریه که در حال حاضر بیشترین خطرها رو اول برای خاورمیانه، آسیا و بعد برای جهان آفریده، در صورتی که دولت اوباما در زمانی که حتی جامعه ایرانی اومد بیرون و صداش رو برد بالا و از آمریکا تقاضا کرد هیچ عملی انجام نداد. و خانم کلینتون چند مدت پیش یه ماه پیش برمیگره میگه خب ما با ما صحبت از ما چیزی نخواستید که ما دیگه مردم چجوری بیان بگن؟
وقتی چی باید بیان اونجا بگن؟ یعنی بیان تو خیابون میگن زنده باد آمریکا که بگیرن به گلوله؟
نه، گفتن رهبران شما باید میومدن با ما صحبت. چجوری؟ کدوم رهبر؟ مردم خودشون اومدن تو خیابون و صدا زدن، فریاد زدن، تقاضا کردن که آقا به داد ما برسید، ما اینا بدیم کشته میدیم. در واقع روند این انقلاب هایی که امروز بهش میگن بهار عربی از ایران آغاز شد، ولی ما نادیده گرفته شدیم، در صورتی که بقیه کشورها مثلا مصر هفته دوم آقای اوباما بلند میشه و این صحبت‌ها رو میکنه. حتی تمام کسانی که امروز جمهوری خواه هستن و نقد کردن اوباما رو نقد کردن، به این مسئله اشاره کردن که آقا مردم ایران که اومدن بیرون و این صداهاشون رو به سرتاسر جهان رسوندن، شما چرا اقدامی نکردین؟ این ضعف شماست. و در نهایت یک به یک همین رو گفتن و به خصوص افرادی که امروز دارن صحبت میکنن و گفتن اگر این مسئله، یعنی سیاست خارجی اوباما به همین شکلی که بوده ادامه پیدا بکنه، ما شاهد اتمی شدن ایران هم خواهیم بود.
خب اجازه بدید که بریم ببینیم چه خبره. فکر میکنم الان آقای سناتور ریک سانتروم داره صحبت میکنه اگه اشتباه نکنم. صدا رو ما میشنویم.
Accountability, they like the fact that I've been there and met with them and believe in them to lead this country.
Chris Wallace.
Thank you, Brett. Governor Romney, I want to follow up on Brett's line of questioning to the Speaker, because many of our viewers tell us that they are supporting Newt Gingrich because they think that he will be tougher than you in taking the fight to Barack Obama in next fall's debates. Why would you be able to make the Republican case against the president more effectively than the Speaker?
Well, let's step back and talk about what's really happening in the country. What we're finding across America is a lot of people are really hurting. 25 million people out of work, stopped looking for work, or in part-time work that need full-time jobs. A lot of people in the middle class who've seen incomes go down as the cost of their living has gone up and up and up. The American people care very deeply about having a president who can get America right again. And all of us on this stage have spoken over the last several debates about the fact that government doesn't create jobs, but the private sector does. I spent my life, my career in the private sector. I understand, by the way, from my successes and failures, what it's going to take to put Americans back to work with high-paying jobs. I can debate President Obama based upon that understanding, and I'll have credibility on the economy when he doesn't. My successes include some businesses that were successful, like Staples and Bright Horizons Children's Centers and a steel mill in the middle of Indiana, some things I learned from, and by the way, some failures. I remember when the founders of JetBlue came to me and said, invest in us. I said, well, that'll never work. Kind of wrong. Now one of my favorite airlines. I know what it takes to get this economy going. The president doesn't. The proof is in his record. It's terrible. My record shows that I can get America working again.
Congresswoman Bachmann, no one questions your conservative credentials, but what about your appeal to independents who are so crucial in a general election? If you are fortunate enough to become the Republican nominee, how would you counter the efforts by the Barack Obama campaign to paint you as too conservative to moderate voters?
Well, it's very clear. In the last 5 years, I've won 4 elections as the first Republican woman ever to win out of the state of Minnesota. And I did that by attracting not only Republicans, but also independents and Democrats as well, because people wanted to know who could they trust. They knew that in me, they may not always agree with me, but they knew that I was a woman who said what she meant and meant what she said. And they respected that level of authenticity and sincerity. And they also knew that I was an action person, that I wasn't just going to sit on my hands. I was going to work and serve them. And that's what I've done.
تا حالا صحبت هم آقای ریک پری و فرماندار که هنوز نوبتش نشده، منظورم صحبت از کسی که صحبت کردن میت رامنی بود که صحبت کردن میت رامنی رو همه رو میپرسن از اینا که برای چی فکر میکنید که شما بهتر کار میکنید. آقای میت رامنی میگفت 25 میلیون بیکاری رو این آقای رئیس جمهور آوردن و وضع تجارت آمریکا و به این وضع افتاده. خانم بیشل مخبن هم ازشون پرسیدم به اون صورتی که چرا از اول میگفتید ایندیپندنت بعد رفتید و شما چه کار میتونید بکنید. هر کدوم از اینها رو میپرسن و اینها الان میرن سراغ آقای ریک پری که ایشون مثل من فراموشکاری هم داره. ما بریم گوش کنیم ببینیم چیزی یادش میره وسط این کار.
I want to share something with you that as each one of these debates, I'm kind of getting where I like these debates. As a matter of fact, I hope Obama and I debate a lot, and I'll get there early. And we will get it on, and we will talk about our differences, which are great. I'll talk about what we've done in the state of Texas. I'll talk about passing a balanced budget amendment to the United States Congress. I'll talk about having the type of part-time Congress that I think Americans are ready for. And you know, there are a lot of people out there, I understand it, you know, there are a lot of folks that said Tim Tebow wasn't going to be a very good NFL quarterback. There are people that stood up and said, well, he doesn't have the right throwing mechanisms, or he doesn't, you know, he's not playing the game right. And you know, he won 2 national championships, and that looked pretty good. We were the national champions in job creation back in Texas. And so, but am I ready for the next level? Let me tell you, I hope I am the Tim Tebow of the Iowa caucuses.
Governor Huntsman, your campaign has been praised by moderates, but many question your ability to galvanize Republicans and energize the conservative base of the party. They're especially leery of your refusal to sign on to a no tax hike pledge. How can you reassure them tonight?
I think people, Neil, are coming around to finding that I am the consistent conservative in this race. They're coming around to find that I'm not going to pander. I'm not going to contort myself into a pretzel to please any audience I'm in front of. And I'm not going to sign those silly pledges. And you know what else? I'm not going to show up at a Donald Trump debate. This nation has been downgraded.
سناتور سندروم در اینجا یک مطلق هم میگه که من البته بهتون بگم که در بین تمام این افرادی که در این گروه هستن ایشون تجارب سیاسی بین‌المللیش بیشتر، ایشون سفیر در چین بوده.
بله، فورمر امباسادور در چین.
ولی متاسفانه حالا یا نمیدونم بعضیا مثل من تلخ گوشتن نمیدونم چطوری است، این نتونست اونطوری که هستش گل کنه. الانم باز در اومد گفتش که به مطلق گفت نه من منتظر این فلانم، نه منتظر اون فلانم، نه منتظر اینم که تو برنامه‌ها شوهای
بله با اینکه گاورنر یوتا هم بوده و تجربه فراوان داره در شوهای متفاوت هم. ولی مسئله‌ای که مهمه همین آقای ریک پری یکی از کسانی هستش که چسبیده به مذهبیون با پول بسیار زیادی هم که داره، گاورنر تگزاس هم هست و میتونه خیلی کارا رو انجام بده، اما این فراموشکاریش در چند دیبیت قبلی یه مقدار کار دستش داد.
دو دفعه این کاری کرده. حالا امروز که باید چون حرفاش همون حرفای خودش بود که حفظ می‌کرد، حالا سوالا رو بعدی رو باید بپرسیم، شاید هم به اونجا برسیم.
مهمترین قسمت‌هایی که در حال حاضر داریم میشنویم قسمت‌های دامستیک، یعنی آمریکایی‌ها بیشتر دوست دارن بدونن وضعیت داخلی آمریکا به چه روزگاری کشیده میشه و چه کسانی بهتر پروژه‌های بهتر و عمرانی دارن برای داخل آمریکا. مسئله سیاست خارجی که ما این مقدار بهش میچسبیم در درجه‌های دوم و سوم اهمیت داره برای مردم آمریکا. 100% سوال خواهند کرد.
بله می‌بینیم.
30 seconds down the line, start with Senator Santorum.
Well, you do what leaders do when they go out and try to bring people together. They tell a narrative and remind Americans who we are and how we solve our problems. This country is a great country because we believe in free people.
In 2008, the American public were convinced by Barack Obama that they needed someone to believe in, that they could believe in. We now understand that what we need is some president who believes in them. That's the narrative. Go out and motivate the American public. Have them talk to their representatives in Washington.
سناتور سنتروم داره میگه که در 2008 همه مردم اوباما رو باور کردند و آقای اوباما الان نشون میده که باید رئیس جمهور مردم رو باور کنه و به نظرش میرسه که یعنی منظورش اینه که این باوری کردن اشتباه بود. آقای اوباما به کجای مملکت رسوند.
خب بالاخره هر جامعه یک بار وقت داره که اشتباه بکنه در هر چند 10 سال.
اینا هر 4 سال یه دعوا اینطوری دارن. ولی بالاخره هر کی میخوان میارن بالا، خرابم شد میکننش بیرون. هم دیگه به جون هم نمیافتن و فردا آتیش
وقت رو دارن مملکتشون رو آتیش نمیزنن مثل دورانی که
خب قدرت هم دارن. هم قدرت، مردم قدرت دارن. ببینید در اینجا هم اشکال زیاده، خیلی زیاده. ولی در حال مملکت رو از بین نمیبرن. یعنی اینا ببین در همین چند، یعنی تا فردا است اینا بودجه رو باید بدن. یعنی هر چقدر شده، اگر شده تا حتی بگن حالا فعلا هست یه بودجه بدن. برای اینکه همشون دارن بازی سیاسی رو ملتشون هم میکنن. فکر نکنین آدم خوبی ان. برای اینکه هر دوتاشون ببین چه فشارها و بازی‌ها و کلکایی میزنن که مردم عصبانی بشن، بگن مثلا اونو نمیخوایم اینو میخوایم. این بازی‌ها رو دارن. ولی در حال این بازی‌ها یک بازی سیاسی است و چون مردم قدرت دارن. ببین یاد خود ما باید دقت کنیم. یادتون هست وقتی اوباما اومد، نه تنها در آمریکا، در اصلا تمام اروپا وقتی میرفت، چه در آلمان یادتون
در اروپا مردم بیشتر به استقبالش رفتن.
بله. و کشورهای تا ایران هم خوشحال شده بود.
ولی میبایست اون شخص انتخاب میشد.
بله.
ولی امروز مردم فهمید، متوجه شدن که این شخص به درد نه داخل آمریکا میخوره، نه سیاست خارجی خوبی داره، به خصوص برای اسرائیل که امروز میبینیم وضعیت خطرناکی براش به وجود اومده.
بله اجازه بدیم این آقا خیلی شانس داره.
Leadership is the key. When you have a Saul Alinsky radical who is a campaigner-in-chief who doesn't do the job of president because he's too busy trying to run for re-election, the Constitution can't work. I helped Ronald Reagan, when Tip O'Neill was Speaker, get enough votes to pass the Reagan program despite a Democratic majority. As Speaker, one of the reasons some people aren't happy with some of my leadership is I actually worked things out with Bill Clinton to get welfare reform, a tax cut, and 4 balanced budgets signed in a way that required bipartisanship because you couldn't get anything done otherwise. So leadership matters immensely in getting this done. Congressman Paul.
یکی از افرادی که بذارید ما اینم گوش کنیم با هم دیگه.
این خیلی مهمه.
You have to get people to come together. They've been coming together to increase the spending for decades. We have to get them to come together to do the opposite. But there are 2 factions up there. One want welfare and the other want warfare around the world and policing the world. So you go to the people who like the warfare and say, give me half of the cuts that have to be in the welfare. Go to the welfare people and say, you give me the cuts to cut the overseas warfare spending and bring people together and live up to what they say.
Congresswoman Bachmann.
As President of the United States, I would have called all 535 members of Congress to come in and sit down in Washington last summer when we were looking at the debt ceiling crisis. And what I would have done is said there are 3 principles that we're going to follow. Because the first one needs to be no new taxes. We're taxed enough already. The second principle needed to be that government can't spend any more money than what it's taking in. And the third principle had to be that we were going to follow the Constitution of the United States. What that would have meant is that we would have looked that $15 trillion debt in the eye and said we're not going to add 1 more cent to it. We're going to prioritize our spending, and we're going to put the reform in these long-term programs now, not wait 8 months or 5 months. We're going to reform right now.
Governor Huntsman.
Leadership is action, not words. And I learned a very important lesson about this when I ran for governor in 2004. I promised the people of my state as governor that we would create the finest state in America for business. I ran on a flat tax proposal. It took us 2 years. We got it delivered. Flat, I hear a lot of people talking about tax reform and a flat. We actually got one done. The finest business climate in the United States we delivered to our people. Health care reform without a mandate. The list went on and on and on. I ran for re-election. I got almost 80% of the vote. Not because I'm a great politician, but I learned some lessons in leadership. The people want to be told where you can take them, and then they want you to deliver.
Thank you. We have many more interesting questions coming up. We have a new feature for you tonight as well. How well are the candidates answering the questions? We're asking you to weigh in on Twitter. Tweet the candidate's last name and the hashtag answer if you think they're tackling the question, or the hashtag dodge if you think they're avoiding the question. Then you can go to foxnews.com/debate to see those results.
اینجا دقت کنید که دارن میگوین برای اینکه هر کدوم از اینها که صحبت میکنن وقتی مردم مورد توجه قرار میگیره، در اینجا دستگاهی گذاشتن که مردم میتونن نشون بدن با دست دادنشون و تشویق کردنشون که از چی خوششون اومده. آقای گرینگریچ کسی هستن که بر خودشون رو صحبتی میکنن. اولا از همه اینها بسیار محکمتر و در دولت کار کردن، در سنا کار، در مجلس کار کردن. بله.
هاوس هم که میدونید، قبل عذر میخوام واسه فرمایشاتون، هاوس هم که میدونید این بخش در آمریکا به دو قسمت تقسیم شده. یکی سنا که متشکل از 100 نفر هست که بسیار مهم است، و دیگری هاوس که پارلمانی که 435 نفر حدوداً در شرکت دارن. اول در پارلمان به تصویب میرسه و بعداً میره به سنا. ایشون سخنگوی پارلمان بوده و از جورجیا میاد و خیلی هم نقش مهمی داشته و همین امروز هم داره. به حرفاش فقط تنها مشکلی که داره به خاطر همین 4 تا زنی که گرفته یک مقداری براش مشکل ایجاد کرده.
نه گرفته، چرا شما براش پاجونی میسازید؟ 4 تا مردم سلام علیک کرده. 5 تا 4 تا پنجمیش هم پیدا شده بود که.
خب وقتی که اینا در این سطح
جوونه هنوز آقا چیکار بده کارش رو درست انجام بده. این آقا اینا یه چیزی هم هست، شوخی هم میکنیم. اینا تا آخر عمرشون که دیگه نمیتونن غلطی بکنن. این بدبختش گرفتیم خود به رئیس جمهور بشه اونجا. تمام مامورای امنیتی این داره میره دستشویی هم دنبالش، کجا میخواد میکنه. ولی حالا جواب منو بده که آقا من کلینتون نبود.
اینا مجبورم فکر می‌کنم هر روز یک بار لباسشون رو بدن خوشویی بدن.
در حال خب اشکال ایشون همینطور که ایشون گفتن یک پرونده‌ای است تا نه اشکال ایشون نبود، اشکال اون آقای که امروز هم مثل که شرکت نخواهد کرد. ما هم ندیدم اینجا حضورشونه. و این آقایی که اولین یعنی مستر کین رو دارم میگم.
بله ایشون کناره کرد. خودش رو
ولی میتونست در اینجا هم شرکت کنه هنوز.
بله دیروز اتفاقا داشت با خانم باربارا والتر صحبت میکرد و یکی از دلایل مهمش رو گفتش که زنم اجازه نداد دیگه، خیلی فشار رومون بود به خاطر حرفایی که زدن
نمیشدن.
و بعد آخر سر باربارا والتر ازش خواست که یه دونه آهنگ شعری بخونه و شروع کرد خوندن.
از رئیس جمهوری اومد مثل ما خواننده شد.
بله شروع کرد خوندن و
از خواننده استفاده اون رفت خواننده شد.
آخه یک فرقی واسه درفتون، یک فرقی بین میگن اسپانیش‌ها هستش و ایرانی‌ها. اسپانیش‌ها اول میرن کارگری میکنن، پول در میارن، میرن دانشگاه درس میخونن. ایرانی اول میرن دانشگاه درس میخونن، بعداً میرن جای دیگه کارگری میکنن. متاسفانه.
بله خانم میشل باخمن یکی از کسانی بود که از اول خیلی محکم وارد این کار شد و بعدش هم چون اگه یادتون باشه یک گروهی به اسم تی پارتی که قبلا هم راجعشون باتون صحبت کرده بودم، تی پارتی در این وسط وقتی این تی پارتی پشت خودش اول فکر کرد به تنهایی میتونه بیاد، میگفت من ایندیپندنت خواه هستم، با ریپابلیکن ها کار ندارم. بعد یواش یواش متوجه شد ریپابلیکن ها هنوز قدرت خیلی بیشتر از تی پارتی هستن، اومد طرف ریپابلیکن ها و گرفتاری ایشون با آقای ریک پری خیلی زیاد. آقای ریک پری که میدونید همون که فراموش میکنه.
بله.
و خیلی بله و خیلی زیاد بود. ولی آقای گرینگریچ امروز همه بهش میگن، چون همه بهش حمله خواهند کرد. اصولا این دو حزب اینطوریان، اگه کسی رفت بالا و خیلی قدرت پیدا کرد و مردم مورد توجه قرار گرفت، بهش حمله میکنن که اون نباشه. یعنی باید اینقدر ضعیف میخوان ضعیف کنن اون کاندیدا رو که باید آخر این بره با رئیس جمهور دیبیت کنه، یا اینا باید بشن روبرو کنن با هم دیگه صحبت کنن و فهم کنن که اون اگه ضعیف باشه روی زبون بازی اوباما خیلی زبون بازه، بسیار هم خوشتیپه هم زبون بازه. گاهی وقتا من یادم میفته به خدا به جوانی خودمون میرفتیم رو سن اینطوری میرفتیم و استای خاص خود آرتیستی داره. برای همینم اول دختر پسرا خاطر خواش بودن.
خب اومد خیلی نقش مهمی بازی کرد روی اینترنت، اومد رفت به دنبال جوونا، کاری که سابقه نداشته در آمریکا. این کسانی که اومدن برای این کمپین گذاشتن مردم عادی رو رها کردن، نه اینکه رها کردن.
ببخشید این عکس الان نگاه کن، این همون جاییه که سومی شاتش رفت.
بله
دست سومیش که باز شده
که فراموشش کرد، گفت منظورش سومی. ایشون خیلی نفوذ داره رو واتیکان، رو کسانی که
پری رو
بله
پری برای اینکه
مذهبی هستن. اینا خیلی مخالف ابورشن هستن و دارن با اون میجنگن که تفاوت‌های خیلی مهم جمهوری‌خواها با دموکرات‌ها بر سر همین مسئله است. دیگری مسئله تکس، جمهوری‌خواها اعتقاد دارن که تکس باید کمتر گرفته بشه بر اساس اینکه این کشور این تظاهراتی که هستش بر حساب همین 1/99 منظورشون این هستش که 1% جامعه پولداره و این کشور سرمایه داره و کسانی که سرمایه دار هستن میباید سرمایه گذاری بکنن تا اون 99% اشتغال داشته باشن، شغل داشته باشن، بتونن زندگی خودشون ادامه بدن. بنابراین باید کمتر تکس گرفته بشه تا دست سرمایه گذارا بیشتر باز بشه که خارج از آمریکا نرن، برای سرمایه گذاری در همین آمریکا بمونن.
البته جمهوری‌خواه اینو میگن.
بله، جمهوری‌خواه منظور همین است.
بریم برنامه سی اومد روی این با هم دیگه لابلای این صحبت می‌کنیم راجع به این مسائل.
And are you vulnerable to that kind of attack?
I think it's a great opportunity for us because I think the president is going to level the same attack. He's going to go after me and say, you know, in businesses that you've invested in, they didn't all succeed. Some failed. Some laid people off. And he'll be absolutely right. But if you look at all the businesses we invested in, over 100 different businesses, they added tens of thousands of jobs. In the real world that the president has not lived in, I actually think he doesn't understand that not every business succeeds. That not every entrepreneur is lucky enough to do as well as the entrepreneurs that I described at Bright Horizons and Staples and that steel company and many, many others. I myself have had the chance of leading 4 different organizations. Each of those was highly successful, in part because of hard work and in part because of good luck. In the real world, some things don't make it. And I believe I've learned from my successes and my failures. The president I'll look at and say, Mr. President, how'd you do when you were running General Motors as the president? Took it over. Gee, you closed down factories. You closed down dealerships. And he'll say, well, I did that to save the business. Same thing with us, Mr. President. We did our very best to make those businesses succeed. I'm pleased that they did, and I've learned the lessons of how the economy works. This president doesn't know how the economy works. I believe to create jobs, it helps to have created jobs.
Thank you. Speaker Gingrich, on the Freddie Mac website in 2007, you said this: I like the GSE, or government-sponsored enterprise like Freddie Mac model. Making home ownership more affordable is a policy goal that I believe conservatives should embrace. Now, in an earlier debate, a recent debate, you said that politicians like Barney Frank, who, in your words, profited from the environment that led to the financial meltdown, should go to jail. Now that it turns out that you were on the Freddie Mac payroll to the tune of more than $1.6 million, how do you answer critics who say that you're being hypocritical?
I think pretty straightforward. Barney Frank was in public office with direct power over Freddie Mac. He exploited that power just as Chris Dodd was in public office when he got special bargains from Countrywide, a firm which went broke. They were using power. I was a private citizen, engaged in a business like any other business. Now, if you read the whole thing that they posted, I said they need more regulations. And I want to go back to my point about helping people buy houses. I worked for years with Habitat for Humanity. I think it's a good conservative principle to try to find ways to help families that are right at the margin learn how to budget, learn how to take care of a house, learn how to buy a house. And I'm not going to step back from the idea that, in fact, we should have as a goal helping as many Americans as possible be capable of buying homes. And when you look, for example, electric membership co-ops, and you look at credit unions, there are a lot of government-sponsored enterprises that are awfully important and do an awfully good job.
Congressman Paul, you are, and having been in this town for, 48 hours now, you are all over Iowa TV these days with a negative ad about Speaker Gingrich. You accuse him of selling access and playing the corrupt revolving door game. What about the explanation you just heard that he's in the private sector and this is free enterprise?
Well, he has a different definition of the private sector than I have, because it's a GSC, government-sponsored enterprise. It's completely different. It's a government agency. They get the money and sponsorship. They get mixed up. It's the worst kind of economy. You know, pure private enterprise, more closely probably what Governor Romney is involved with. But if it's government-sponsored, it's a mixture of business and government. It's very, very dangerous. Some people say if it goes to extreme, it becomes fascism, because big business and big government government get together. So yes, they get money. And I was talking about that for a long time, the line of credit, the excessive credit from the Federal Reserve, the Community Reinvestment Act. For 10 years or so, the Austrian economists knew there was a bubble, and at this time, nobody was listening or doing anything in the Congress. And then to go to work for them and get money from them, it literally is it's literally coming from the taxpayer. They went broke. We had to bail them out. So indirectly, that was money that he ended up getting. They're still getting money from us. Government-sponsored enterprise. It's not a free market enterprise.
Speaker Gingrich, 30 seconds to respond.
Well, let me just go back to what I said a minute ago. The term government-sponsored enterprise has a very wide range of things that do a great deal of good. Go across this state and talk to people in the electric membership co-ops. Go across this state and talk to people in the credit unions. There are a lot of very good institutions that are government-sponsored, and frankly, the idea that anything which in any way has ever touched government could raise questions about doctors dealing with Medicare and Medicaid and a whole range of other government activities. There are many things governments do. I did no lobbying of any kind for any organization, and that was a key part of every agreement we had.
Well, let me pick up with that with you, Congresswoman Bachmann, because you accuse Speaker Gingrich of peddling his influence with congressional Republicans to help the companies that paid him tens of millions of dollars since he's left office. Given his denial over time, and again tonight, that he denies ever having lobbied, what is your evidence, hard evidence, that he engaged in influence peddling?
Well, it's the fact that we know that he cashed paychecks from Freddie Mac. That's the best evidence that you can have. Over $1.6 million. And frankly, I am shocked listening to the former Speaker of the House because he's defending the continuing practice of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. There's a big difference between a credit union and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and they were the epicenter of the mortgage financial meltdown. I was trying to see these two entities put into bankruptcy because they frankly need to go away when the Speaker had his hand out and he was taking $1.6 million to influence senior Republicans to keep the scam going in Washington, D.C. That's absolutely wrong. We can't have as our nominee for the Republican Party someone who continues to stand for Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. They need to be shut down, not built up.
Speaker Gingrich.
Well, the easiest answer is that's just not true. What she just said is factually not true. I never lobbied under any circumstance. I never went in and suggested in any way that we do this. In fact, I tried to help defeat the Housing Act when the Democrats were in charge of the House. And if you go back and talk to former Congressman Rick Lazio, he'll tell you when we were passing housing reform while I was Speaker, I never at any time tried to slow down the reform effort. In fact, I helped him pass the reform bill. And I think sometimes people ought to have facts before they make wild allegations.
Let me
yes, sure. Congresswoman.
Well, after the debate that we had last week, PolitiFact came out and said that everything that I said was true. And the evidence is that Speaker Gingrich took $1.6 million. You don't need to be within the technical definition of being a lobbyist to still be influence peddling with senior Republicans in Washington, D.C. to get them to do your bidding. And the bidding was to keep this grandiose scam of Freddie Mac going. That is something that our nominee can't stand for. We have to shut down these government enterprises, and we've got to end them. And I think that's shocking that he's saying that.
Can I just say two things? Speaker Gingrich, quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to say two things. First, my policy is to break up both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It is not anything like what she just described. Second, I want to state unequivocally for every person watching tonight, I have never once changed my positions because of any kind of payment. Because the truth is, I was a national figure who was doing just fine, doing a whole variety of things, including writing best-selling books, making speeches, and the fact is, I only chose to work with people whose values I shared, and having people have a chance to buy a house is a value I believe still is important in America.
Now to Neil Cavuto with questions about the economy.
Speaker Gingrich, not to make you a target, but
it goes with being right here.
You just responded this morning, sir, tweeted originally and then with follow-up statements as a major breakthrough this plan on the part of Republican Congressman Paul Ryan working with Democratic Senator Ron Wyden to find a sort of an updated way to keep Medicare solvent. And this would involve a choice that those who like the program as it is can stick with it. There will be a private option, et cetera. But earlier on, this might have confused Congressman Ryan and others for whom you had said with his initial Medicare fix that it was right-wing social engineering. Later on, you backed off that comment, said that there was much you could find in Mr. Ryan's plan to like. Can you blame Governor Romney for saying you have a consistency problem on this issue?
I'm not in the business of blaming Governor Romney. I'm in the business of trying to understand what we can do as a policy. If you go back and look at the Meet the Press quote, it didn't reference him, and I'll come back and say it again. A free society should make very big decisions with the support of the people. Now, you can earn that support. You can win a communications argument. Reagan was very, very good at that. But the only point I was making on Meet the Press is when you're going to have a major change, you have to communicate with the American people in order to ensure that they are for you. Now, Governor Romney came up, frankly, with a very good variation on the Ryan plan, which allowed the maintenance of the current system. Paul has adopted that, and I think it a very brave act by Senator Ron Wyden. You now have a Democrat willing to co-sponsor the bill. I've endorsed the concept today. I think it is a big step forward, and I think Governor Romney deserves some of the credit for having helped figure out a way to make this thing workable. So I think it's a nice thing to actually have a bipartisan plan in Washington that we could actually look at in a positive way and hope would help save Medicare.
Governor Romney, do you want to respond to that compliment?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I hope people understand just how big today is for this country. We all understand that the spending crisis is extraordinary, with $15 trillion now in debt, with a president that's racked up as much debt as almost all the other presidents combined. But there's another problem we have, which is our national balance sheet, which are these obligations that we've made that we have no funding behind, and it adds up to $62 trillion. And today, Republicans and Democrats came together with Senator Wyden and Congressman Paul Ryan to say we have a solution to remove that $62 trillion. This is a big day for our kids and our grandkids. It's an enormous achievement. It means we finally have the prospect of dealing with something which has the potential of crushing our future generations, and a good Democrat and a good Republican came together. This is the impact of people on both sides of the aisle that care about America in a critical time, and I applaud it. It's good news.
Congressman Paul, as you've been warning, we are on the brink of another government shutdown because of spending that you've called out of control. But haven't you contributed to that spending problem yourself, sir, supporting over the years earmarks that have benefited your district and your state? Back in 2009, you explained this by saying, if I can give my district any money back, I encourage that. I don't think that the federal government should be doing it, but if they're going to allot the money, I have a responsibility to represent my people. Isn't that what they call a mixed message, Congressman?
Well, it's a mixed question. This is a problem because the real message is you should include in your question, also, you have never voted once for an earmark. No, it's a principle that I deal with because if the government takes money from you and you fill out your tax form, you take your deductions. I look at that the same way in our communities. They take our money, they take our highway funds, and we have every right to apply for them to come back. Matter of fact, it's a bigger principle for me than that. I think this whole thing is out of control on the earmarks because I think the Congress has an obligation to earmark every penny, not to deliver that power to the executive branch. What happens when you don't vote for the earmarks, it goes into the slush fund, the executive branch spends the money, then you have to grovel to the executive branch and beg and plead and say, oh, please return my highway funds to me. So it's this whole principle of budgeting that is messed up, but I never voted for an earmark, but I do argue the case for the people I represent to try to get their money back if at all possible.
But isn't that the same thing of having your cake and eating it too? You can complain about earmarks, but then if there are provisions there that help your district or your state, that's different. If 434 other members felt the same way,
Yeah, I don't.
How would we ever fix the problem?
Yeah, but you're missing the point. I don't complain about earmarks because it's the principle of the Congress meeting their obligation. But if everybody did what I did, there would be no earmarks. The budget would be balanced, and we'd be cutting about 80% of the spending. So that would be the solution. But you also want to protect the process. You want to emphasize the responsibility of the Congress in not delivering more power to the president. I would be a different kind of president. I wouldn't be looking for more power. Everybody wants to be a powerful executive and run things. I, as a president, wouldn't want to run the world. I don't want to police individual activities and their lifestyle, and I don't want to run the economy. So that's like an entirely different philosophy, but it's very, very much in our tradition and in the tradition of our Constitution.
Governor Perry, you said the only way to stop...
Yeah, but when I talk about overhauling Washington, D.C., one of the things I talk about, besides a part-time Congress, is no longer having lifetime terms for the federal bench. I think that is one of the ways that you keep these unaccountable legislators with robes from trying to dictate to the rest of us. And I would say, you know, you pick Alito, Roberts, or Thomas, pick one.
All right. Would you pick one, please?
Yes, Roberts, Thomas, Alito, and Scalia.
All right. Speaker Gingrich?
I think that's a pretty darn good list, and I would sign up for those guys. Scalia is probably the most intellectual of the four, but they're all four terrific judges. I mean, if we had 9 judges as good as those 4, we would be very happy with the Supreme Court.
Congressman Paul?
From my viewpoint, they're all good and they're all bad because our country, a long time ago split freedom up into 2 pieces, personal liberty and economic liberty, and the judges, as is the Congress, as the nation, think it's 2 issues. It's about 1 issue, so therefore Congress is split on this issue as well as our judges.
Last chance to say your name.
No, I'm not going to put it. All of them are good and all of them are bad.
Congresswoman Bachmann.
Well, I do think that there are good justices, and I would put Antonin Scalia at the top of the list. I would also include Clarence Thomas and John Roberts and Alito. I think they're all marvelous. It'd be very easy to pick any one of them.
Governor Huntsman?
One of the reasons I'm so optimistic about the future of this country is because we have rule of law, let's face it. One of the great things that this country has that very few other countries have, so the judiciary is critically important. It's also important to note that governors actually have some experience in appointing judges. You got to make those hard decisions, and as I reflect on those who today serve, I've got to say Justice Roberts and Justice Alito fit the bill very, very nicely.
Thank you all.
That was a valiant effort.
I tried.
Yeah.
I tried.
Coming up, there's a lot of ground to cover in this next hour. The threat from Iran and other foreign policy hotspots, up and down oil prices, immigration and border issues, and controversial social issues.
بله. خواهش میکنم که اتاق کنترل لطفاً تا اومدن ما رو بیارید برای اینکه مسئله بعدی تمام نشستیم برای اون مسئله نفت، مسئله ایرانه که فکر میکردیم ممکنه اینا امروز صحبت نکنن ولی خوشبختانه صحبت خواهیم کرد. اولا آقای شمرانی بذارین برسیم راجبه این آقای رامپول. این رامپول گاهی وقتی یه حرفایی میزنه آدم وقتی نگاه میکنه از بیرون، وقتی خودش داخل نیست تو این کارا و از بیرون نگاه میکنه فرق میکنه. نگاه میکنه میبینی آقا مثلا ماها ممکن است خودم همش خود من بارها سوال کردم، دوربین سوال کردم آیا واقعا باید آقای خمینی میومد برای بهتر کردن ایران؟ واقعا چرا اینطوری شد؟ هر مملکتی هر کسی میتونه، حالا بگیم دخالت خارجی بوده که من باورم ممکنه یعنی هست برای اینکه میبینیم بعدش چی شد، ولی فرض کنیم اصلا دخالت خارجی هم نباشه، هر مملکتی میتونه اشتباه کنه. ببین الان با آقای رامپال برای چی دست میزنن؟ همون تیپی که گاهی وقتا آقای خمینی میگفت مردم دلشون خوش میشه درد میزنن. حالا نمیگم این خمینیه، ولی این آقا اولا برخلاف همه اکثر آمریکایی‌ها مخالف با اون چیزایی که دولت آمریکا و ملت آمریکا باش همیاری دارن، مثل اسرائیل. این مخالف اسرائیل. از اون طرف پیش خودش هم حرفایی رو میزنه که مثلا الان دیدید که راجع به دادسرای عالی، یعنی دادگستری عالی، تمام بزرگترین قاضیای آمریکا صحبت میکردن و درست هم میگفتن که مثلا قاضی‌ها اگه دموکرات باشن یا رپابلیک باشن پارتی بازی میکنن، آره فلان میکنن، ولی اونا میگفتن قانون رو بعضی وقتا رعایت نمیکنن. بعد این آقا هم گفتش که من خودم یه اتفاقی که افتاده بود وقت زمان بوش بود رفتیم و بوش زیرش امضا کرد و اون قانون برگردونیم از این حرفا. ولی این آقا اصلا ادعا داره که به ایران چیکارش میخواد بم داشته باشه، بز داشته باشه. بعد میگن خب این که این کارا رو میکنین در سال میگه باش صحبت کنیم. یعنی این آقا به عنوان یک نماینده ملت در این لااقل 30 ساله که حالا ممکنه 8 سالش 12 سالش باشه، نمیدونم چند سال توی پارلمان بوده، این هنوز نمیفهمه که دولت ایران 30 ساله داره با آمریکا صحبت میکنه ولی بمبش هم داره درست میکنه و به مردمش هم کاری نداره.
ایشون عقایدشون اصولا یه مقداری متفاوت هست نسبت به
خیلی متفاوته. بله.
و حرفایی که میزنه، یکی از صحبت‌های این بودش که خب آیا مجلسشون باید برتری داشته باشه نسبت به قوانینشون و قاضی‌ها باید برتری داشته باشن. این یه مسئله بود. مسئله دیگه که در رابطه با سیاست چین صحبت کردن خیلی مهم هست و اون آخه آمریکا اومده چیکار کرده؟ چرا بسیاری در زمان بوش چرا اومدن رفتن و در چین سرمایه گذاری کردن و چین رو در باز گذاشتن که چینیا بیان اینجا؟ شما نگاه بکنید از زمانی که جورج بوش این ارتباط رو برقرار کرد، بله، از زمانی که جورج بوش این تماس رو برقرار کرد و این قوانین رو آغاز کرد، این راه رو باز کرد که رابطه بین آمریکا و چین این گونه شد، چینی‌ها اومدن اینجا سرمایه گذاری کردن، آمریکا رفتش اونجا و شروع کرد ساختمون سازی و به جایی رسیدن که امروز مکدونالد در گوشه و کنار چین کارش رو داره آغاز میکنه. چرا این کار کردن؟ آمریکایی‌ها اومدن روی این حساب کردن که چین تا سالهای آینده 1.5 بیلیون پیپل جمعیت داره، درسته؟ خب میتونن با فشاری که روی مردم هست میتونن در سالهای آینده این کشور رو به چند قسمت تقسیم کنن، همون بلایی رو بیارن به سر که در شوروی سابق آوردن که روسیه امروز قسمت نگاه بکنید روسیه غربی است، بسیار از مردم غرب رو دوست دارن، افکار غربی رو دوست دارن، آهنگای غربی یا این مسئله رو به کنار بگذاریم. اینها رو اومدن روی چین سرمایه گذاری کردن و در رو باز گذاشتن که چین هم بیاد اینجا سرمایه گذاری روی این است که شاید بتونن سیستم غربی رو به چین ببرن تا مشتری از طرف مردم برای خودشون، یعنی بتونن به فرض یه بازار 500 میلیون 600 میلیون 1 میلیارد نفری رو به سمت خودشون جلب بکنن. چین از این موقع استفاده کرد با پشتکاری که مردمش و فضای در واقع پرکاری که برای مردم به وجود آورده
و ارزانی اجرت
و مردم واقعا زندگی ندارن. شما نگاه بکنید چرا میگن چینی ها این مقدار بد اخلاقن؟ به خاطر اینکه چینی ها به خانواده هایی که بقیه کشورهای دیگه دارن چند فرزندی ندارن.
داریم عقب میافتیم. برگردیم
بعدا صحبت می‌کنیم.
But I'd be running with the American people because it would be a much better policy. But for you to say that there's some scientific evidence and some people arguing that maybe in a year they might have a weapon, there's a lot more saying they don't have it. There's no UN evidence of that happening. Klepper at the in our National Security Department, he says there is no evidence. It's no different than it was in 2003. You know what I really fear about what's happening here? It's another Iraq coming. There's war propaganda going on, and we're arguing. To me, the greatest danger is that we will have a president that will overreact, that we will soon bomb Iran, and the sentiment is very mixed. It's very mixed even in Israel. You know, the head of the security for Israel, who just recently retired, said that it wouldn't make any sense to do this, to take them out because they might be having a weapon.
Regime killing and torturing its own people. Thousands of people said to be killed at the hands of the Assad regime. At what point should the U.S. consider military intervention there?
Well, I've already called for an overfly zone, no-fly zone over Syria already. They are Iran's partner. They are attached at the hip, and we have to stand firm with our ally in that region, Israel. There needs to be no space between the United States and Israel, and this administration has absolutely bungled. It is the most muddled foreign policy that I can ever remember in my lifetime. Whether it was in 2009 when we had the opportunity, either covertly, overtly, or other ways, of helping the Iranian citizens as they were trying to overthrow that repressive regime, whether it was working with Mubarak and trying to have a moderate to come in and replace him, whether it was leading from behind, as we've seen in Libya, and now we've seen this president, as Mitt and Newt have both talked about, asking the Iranians to give us back that drone. What we should have done was one of two things. We either destroy it or we retrieve it. He took a third route, which was the worst and the weakest, and that is to do nothing.
Now to my colleague, Neil Cavuto. Neil.
For candidates, I want to move on, if we can, to energy issues. And Speaker Gingrich, I'd like to begin with you. As you know, the president, sir, has rejected any efforts to tie a payroll tax cut extension with the Keystone pipeline and to reopen it and to explore reopening it as well. He says that any other way to connect the two would be akin to adding an extraneous issue. Given his opposition and the likelihood that the Keystone issue could be up in the air for a year or more, how do you recommend Republicans deal with this to force the issue?
You know, Neil, I sometimes get accused of using language that's too strong. So I've been standing here editing. I'm very concerned about not appearing to be zany. And but I want to paint a picture for all of us. The Iranians are practicing closing the Straits of Hormuz. The Canadian Prime Minister has already said to the American President, if you don't want to build this pipeline to create 20,000 American jobs and bring oil through the United States to the largest refinery complex in the world, Houston, I'm going to put it straight west in Canada to Vancouver and ship the oil direct to China, so you'll lose the jobs, you'll lose the throughput, you'll lose 30 or 40 years of work in Houston. And the President of the United States cannot figure out that it is, I'm using mild words here, utterly irrational to say, I'm now going to veto a middle-class tax cut to protect left-wing environmental extremists in San Francisco so that we're going to kill American jobs, weaken American energy, make us more vulnerable to the Iranians, and do so in a way that makes no sense to any normal, rational American.
No offense, sir, but you didn't answer my question. What would you do to try to move on this within a year?
What should the congressional Republicans do? They should attach it to the middle-class tax cut, send it to the president, force him to veto it, send it a second time. We had to send welfare reform to Bill Clinton 3 times. He vetoed it twice. By the 3rd time, the popular outrage was so angry, 92% of the country wanted to have welfare reform, he decided to sign it. It happened to be an election year. I'd say to the president, you want to look like you are totally out of touch with the American people, be my guest, but I'm not backing down when we're right and you are totally wrong.
Governor Huntsman, on this same issue, if you don't mind, the delay, as you've pointed out, stands to threaten thousands of jobs. In a recent speech, you said potentially up to 100,000 jobs. But the president's supporters say a rush decision could cost the environment a great deal more. What I'd like to ask you, Governor, is there any condition under which a President Huntsman would say the need to protect our land trumps the need to provide more jobs?
It's always going to be a balancing act. We've got land that everybody respects and appreciates, but the job we've got to undertake as American people is to fuel our future. We have no choice. I mean, our economy has hit the wall. I want to get rid of that heroin-like addiction we have based on imported oil. $300 billion transfers every year from this country to a lot of unpredictable and relationships that are no more than transactional. In order to get to where this country needs to be, we need a relationship with Canada from which we can draw raw materials. But I also want to make sure that I'm able, as president, to disrupt the oil monopoly. There's a one-product monopoly in terms of product distribution in this country. If we're going to achieve real energy independence, we're going to have to be able to draw from a multiplicity of products like natural gas. We wake up to the reality, Neil, in this country that we have more natural gas than Saudi Arabia has oil. I say, how stupid are we? When are we going to get with the picture and start converting to transportation, converting to manufacturing, converting to electricity and power generation? It is completely within our grasp. It's going to require a president who understands that delicate balance and who's going to be able to go out with an aggressive plan toward energy independence that gets it done for this country.
Congresswoman Bachmann, you were very critical, Congresswoman, of the extended shutdown after the BP oil spill that I believe lasted upwards of 5-6 months in terms of a moratorium. I was wondering, though, Congresswoman, if you were president and there were such a disaster again, what would be an acceptable period for oil drilling to cease, for you to get to the bottom of a problem?
Well, what we needed to do was find out what the true cause of the problem was, and the Obama administration wasn't willing to have a true and thoughtful investigation to get to the bottom of it. President Obama jumped to conclusions, and he put a moratorium on accessing American oil in the Gulf region that actually hurt the economy more than the original disaster. But I wanted to add something on Keystone. Keystone is extremely important, the pipeline. This pipeline is one that would have brought at least 20,000 jobs, at least $6.5 billion worth of economic activity. And if I was President of the United States, I wouldn't have taken the decision that President Obama did. His entire calculus was based upon his reelection effort. Because quite frankly, the radical environmentalists said to President Obama, you pass Keystone, we're not going to do your volunteer door-to-door work. That's what Barack Obama has done to this country. He's put his reelection over adding jobs and making the United States energy independent. I would have made the decision as President of the United States, we would have put Keystone online immediately.
Governor Perry, you have railed against the special treatment afforded Cylinder as of the other candidates here tonight, and particularly the tax code incentives for green technologies and allowances that have been made for this industry. But as Texas governor, you have afforded the same attention to the oil industry. Back in 2003, you signed a bill that reduced the tax paid by some natural gas companies that have helped them reap since better than $7 billion in tax savings. So I guess what I'm saying is, are you guilty of the same behavior as governor, favoring an industry that you claim this president has, favoring the green industry?
Today's the 220th anniversary of the signing of the Bill of Rights. And one of those, the 10th Amendment, I like a lot. And the reason is because that's how our founding fathers saw this country set up, where that we had these laboratories of innovation. It should be in the purview and the decision-making process of a state if they want to put tax policies in place that helps make them be more competitive. We did it not only for the oil and gas industry, but we also did it for the alternative industry, alternative energy industry, and the wind industry. They came in droves, made Texas the #1 wind energy producing state in the nation. But government shouldn't be picking winners and losers from Washington, D.C. That's the difference. If in the states, I'll promise you, Terry Branstad in this state, he knows how to put tax policy, regulatory policy in place to make his state be more competitive. And you need 50 states out there competing with each other and Washington out of their hair.
Thank you, Neil. And a reminder, go to foxnews.com/debate to see how well the candidates are answering the questions with your votes. Coming up, we'll ask about border issues, immigration, and a topic that got a lot of attention on Twitter, plus some controversial social issues as well. Stay tuned.
بله اینقدر مطالب زیاد شده اینا کوتاه میدن که نمیرسیم.
ده ها مطالب هستش که باید راجعش صحبت بکنیم، ولی مهمترینش همین در رابطه با ایران.
بله بذارید راجع به
بعد میپردازیم بعد از اون.
بله بفرمایید
شما بفرمایید.
عرض کنم که در اینجا من تعجب میکنم، البته در اینجا صحبتایی که شد باید همه‌شو بگیم که دوستان متوجه بشن، ولی متوجه بشیم که این آقای پال،
رام پال،
بله آقای رام پال، این اصلا من نمیدونم این بالاخره نماینده مجلس بوده، یعنی هیچ چی خبردار نیست، مثل که اصلا بر راجع به ایران یا حرفایی که میزنه همش از خودش یه حرفایی میزنه که مثلا سازمان انرژی اتمی جهان گفته اصلا اینا هیچی ندارن.
نه این اعلامیه که هر چیزی که IAEA داد، ریپورت که داده رو به طور کلی رد کرد، گفت این ساختگیه. یعنی دقیقاً عین حکومت اسلامی، انگار یک نماینده از حکومت اسلامی اومده اینجا و داره صحبت میکنه به خاطر اینکه بیاد رئیس جمهور آمریکا بشه.
خب ببینید یه مسئله هست، آمریکا کشور بزرگیه، در هر جایی هم که میشینن یه عده از اولا خیلی از آمریکایی‌ها هنوز تازه دارن راجع به سیاست چیز میفهمن، اونم برای همین اینترنتی که جوان‌ها یه چیز فهمیدن، ولی در شروعش برای اینکه هیچ حساب به اینها چیزی رو نگفتن. آمریکا اصلا فکر می‌کنید قبل از این 32 سال اصلا آمریکا ایران و عراق رو عوضی می‌گرفتن آمریکایی‌ها.
بله نمیدونستن اصلا کجاست.
ما اینو میگفتیم پرژیانیستی، اونا نمی‌فهمیدن ما کجاییم.
ولی یه چیزی که برای ما واقعا افت داره اینه که ما بیشتر در سیاست، یعنی حواسمون جمع‌تر بوده و بیشتر سیاسی بودیم، ملت ایران به طور کلی در میتونم بگم حالا همین 50-60 سال اخیر به خصوص، ولی عقب‌تر موندیم. جامعه آمریکا به چه دلیل جلو افتاده؟ به خاطر اون کسانی که پایه‌گذاریشو کردن. اون چندین نفری که اومدن، 20 چند نفری که اومدن، اینها وکلای برجسته واقعا در زمان خودشون جهانی بودن، اومدن ساختاری رو نوشتن که صدها این جامعه بتونه روش یکی بعد از دیگری بیاد و براش کار بکنه. اون مهم، نخبگان نوشتن قانون اساسی، اون چیزی که فرست امندمنت رو به فرض قوانین دیگه‌ای رو که پایه‌گذاری کردن. ولی در رابطه با ایران این آقای ران پال به طور کلی حمایت کرد از موضع حکومت اسلامی و گفت ما باید باهاش نگوشیت بکنیم، کنار بیام. سیاست رو اینجوری میگه، کنار اومدن، یعنی به هیچ عنوان نقض حقوق بشر یا اعمال تروریستی که انجام داده یا حتی سربازان آمریکایی که در عراق کشته شده رو ایشون ندیده گرفت و گفت بازی رو اینجوری نگاه میکنه که مقصر خود آمریکا بوده که اصلا وارد این جنگ شده، حالا اون برای خودش محفوظ، ولی اصلا نگاه نکرد که حکومت اسلامی چه شخصیتی، یعنی چه رسالتی برای خودش داره. مطرح برای نیستش که شما دوست نداری وارد جنگ بشی، باید ببینی اون شخصی که اونجا یا اون کشوری که اونجاست، اون مقامی که اونجا هست، نگاهش نسبت به تو چیه. که ایشون
در حال اینا رو تمام مردم میبینن و این راحتی هم نیست که اگه این رئیس جمهوری میشه که فاتح آمریکا خونده است، اصلا در عرض 4 ماه یا ترور میشه یا اینکه اصلا آمریکا به بدبختی میفته. با این طرز تفکر این اصلا مثل افرادی است که همینایی که میرفتن جلوی خیابونا میایستادن و با هم دیگه مثل اونا داره رفتار میکنه. ولی ببینید در مقابل این یعنی تندی‌هایی هم هست. مثلا از ریک پری وقتی پرسیدن گفت من عقیده دارم باید اصلا پروازها رو بر روی ایران و
نوفلای زون ایران و سوریه
رو بذارید تمام که هیچ کس نتونه از اونجا بره و بیاد و در ضمن برای همین درون هواپیمای غیر قابل خلبان، یعنی بدون خلبان درون، میگفت که اولا ما باید در همون روز اول یا نابودش میکردیم یا به ایران میگفتیم اگه پس نمیدی به زور پس میگیریم، یعنی حمله نظامی بکنیم یا به هر صورتی یه کار دیگه ای میکردن. و
البته ایشون نظریات قبلیش هم در رابطه با سوریه و ایران این بوده که ما باید اول خودمون رو نشون بدیم، اگر موافقت نکردن بعداً حمله نظامی بکنیم. یعنی ایشون و کسانی که این قبیل افکار رو دارن این گونه فکر میکنن که ما اول باید خودمون رو نشون بدیم، بگیم آقا این چیزها رو میخوایم، اگر انجام نشد دست به عملیات نظامی.
بذارین این مسئله رو ببینیم، اگر این مسئله مهم که هست همه مسائل برای آمریکا، بذار ببینیم چی هست اگر که این نبود. آره برمیگردیم ایران رو.
So far, there is no clear proof that Mr. Holder knew about the controversial aspects of this operation, and he points out that he actually helped stop it once it came to his attention. Are you and other Republicans politicizing this issue as General Holder claims?
If I'm the President of the United States and I find out that there is an operation like Fast and Furious and my Attorney General didn't know about it, I would have him resign immediately. You cannot, the President of the United States comes to El Paso, Texas earlier this year and proclaims that the border of Texas and Mexico, the U.S. border with Mexico, is safer than it's ever been. Well, let me tell you, I've been dealing with this issue for 11 years. I've sent Texas Ranger recon teams there. Our law enforcement men and women face fire from across the border or in the U.S. side